Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan Ward. I'm the senior editor of the Getty Vocabulary program at the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles. I'm also the current vice chair on the board of CIDOC, and I should actually be with you today in person in Tallinn. Unfortunately, as you might be able to hear in my voice, I became sick and couldn't travel, which was really disappointing and frustrating. So I apologize for that, and I also apologize if my voice is not exactly perfect. Over the past several years, I've presented at CIDOC or held regular sessions or workshops, often with software architect Gregg Garcia, to discuss issues related to the Getty vocabularies, or even vocabularies in general. The last time was the virtual conference in 2020 held by our friends in Geneva. We have been very busy over the past couple of years, so I have quite a few updates to discuss. First, I'll talk about new content and contributions, and then I'll discuss some technical updates, and then a broader discussion about editorial concerns. After that, Gregg Garcia will present on important changes and updates to our linked open data site. Since we're not there in person, if you have any questions, I'll have my contact information at the end of my presentation, and you are more than welcome to get in touch with me via email. The good news is that we've had a lot of new contributions to the vocabularies since 2020. One of the most important was the ULAN data from the RKD in the Netherlands. That is approximately 220,000 artist names, a gigantic set of data, many with variant names and thousands of associative relationships and semantic links to other artists in ULAN, and all have RKD identifiers and Wikidata identifiers. We are processing this iteratively. First, thousands of these RKD records merged with pre-existing ULAN records. Second, we are examining the new RKD records that are complete and moving them into the published data in small batches, while at the same time checking for new merges that we may have missed. This is such a large data set, it will take quite some time. And thirdly, we are also specifically editing and fleshing out incomplete RKD records. Here's an example of an RKD record that was processed recently. We made sure to begin to publish records for artists in underrepresented areas of ULAN. African artists, just as one example, like this one here. You can see here how the RKD is credited and sourced in each record, along with their identifier and a Wikidata identifier. The Tokyo National Research Institute for Cultural Properties, or Tobunken, contributed about 2,000 names of Japanese artists to ULAN as well. This is particularly notable because the records include artist names in Japanese kanji. Here's an example that you can see in ULAN with a kanji variant of the artist name and new sources from Japan as well. Interesting to note that Japanese libraries and research institutions tend to prefer Asian names in the Western style with a comma pivot between family name and first name. A project I had mentioned in Geneva has finally come to fruition, and that is our continuation and extension of the Built Works Registry. The Built Works Registry, or BWR, was a project based out of Columbia University and the Avery Architectural and Fine Arts Library. It contains metadata for 70,000 architectural or built works around the world with links to architects, architectural firms, and other related people. Links to geographic places with coordinates, often links to materials, and sometimes hierarchical links, such as buildings within an overall university campus, for example. This rich data was put together by a variety of people over a variety of years and was eventually hosted by ArtStore in New York. A couple of years ago, it was suggested that the vocabulary program take over the project as ArtStore was no longer able to do so, and we use this as a use case for our Cultural Object Name Authority vocabulary, since it is explicitly for works of art and architecture. This has been a learning experience for us as we took their data, which was in Excel spreadsheets, and used our own open refine reconciliation service to help create links to existing records in the vocabularies, such as geographic places for locations and architects' names. Once we established those links, we then loaded the remaining terms that had no current vocabulary links, creating, at the very least, stub records for them. Then we loaded the data into Kona and are now reviewing the records, making sure that data and links are clean. This is another long-term project. Since many people worked on the BWR over the years, the data is sometimes inconsistent. However, it's been a good learning process. Here's an example of what a BWR record now looks like in Kona. I've highlighted a few things. At the top, the preferred concept name, the Aga Khan Museum, the work type, which is a museum, which is a link to the term in AAT, a link to the creators of the work, both an architectural firm and an architect, both of which are linked to ULAN records, a TGN link to the location, and then on the right you can see the original BWR codes and IDs in case we or someone else needs to go back to the original data. Again, this continues to be a good way for us to see potential value or roadblocks when it comes to taking data submissions into our Kona vocabulary, which is technically still in development. We just finished loading another large set of geographic places and additional data from the National Geospatial Agency into TGN, focusing on several nations where our data was quite weak, including Iran and Japan. This was over 200,000 records and vastly improved what existed. This data load, too, contained thousands of records with preferred terms in other languages. In this case, Japanese in kanji on the left and Persian Farsi script on the right. We will continue to upload nation data as we can and have time to do so. There have been a couple of recent scholarly and curatorial projects at the Getty Research Institute that are contributing data to the vocabularies. Those include the Florentine Codex initiative and a curatorial project focused on East German artists. Both are expanding the vocabularies in interesting areas. If you're not already aware, the Florentine Codex is a 12-book encyclopedia written in 16th century Mexico. At the end of the 16th century, the manuscript made its way to the Medici family, where it stayed for centuries until going to the Biblioteca Medicia Laurenziana in Florence. The Biblioteca is a partner with the Getty Research Institute in this project in making the Florentine Codex digitally available. However, focus is specifically on Book 12 of the Codex. Book 12 tells the history of the conquest of Mexico from the point of view of the Mexica, the indigenous people of the Valley of Mexico. The book is written in the Nahuatl language, and part of the initiative is to contribute approximately 4,000 terms from this encyclopedia to the vocabularies in 4 languages: English, Spanish, Classical Nahuatl, and Contemporary Eastern Huastecan Nahuatl. This is a multi-year project with specially hired employees and translators. But for us in the vocabularies, it's a fruitful relationship because it is such an important document, so carefully translated, and contains terminologies in languages that are poorly represented in any thesaurus or vocabulary. Here you can see a record in the AAT for their contributed term, Xochoquitzlapaloa, and I apologize for a very bad pronunciation there, I'm sure. That's a ceremonial, tearful greeting. You can see the term in Classical Nahuatl, then below, additional descriptive notes in Spanish and Eastern Huastecan Nahuatl. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a second project in the curatorial department at the GRI that specifically dealt with East German artists. This was, I believe, the first time GRI curatorial staff had used our own open refine reconciliation system to match existing records in ULAN, add data to those existing records, and contribute thousands more artists back to ULAN who are active in East Germany. we now have a total of approximately 3,000 records flagged with East German in ULAN. The nice thing about this data is that it included many associative relationships with other artists and other information such as where they were active. Okay, as promised, some technical updates. I've spoken about our Open Refine Reconciliation service a number of times. I first introduced it at the ICOM conference in Kyoto in 2019, and it's proven really helpful for many institutions, which is heartening. However, we're still working on the tool and have made a few requested changes. To quickly recap, OpenRefine is an open source data wrangling software that allows you to reconcile one's own data with another data set, provided that data set has a reconciliation service that you can connect to. For example, I realize this is pretty hard to see, but let's say you are at a museum and have a spreadsheet with artist names in a column, and you want to reconcile them with what is in ULAN and grab ULAN identifiers. You go to the column of names, then click Reconcile, and then click Start Reconciling. That opens up a box where you can add our reconciliation service to the tool, which is the HTTPS address at the top. You only have to enter this once, no matter if you upgrade OpenRefine. The next box allows you to choose what vocabulary you'd like to reconcile against, in this case ULAN. It will also allow you to add additional columns as properties to help eliminate homographs. We have a tutorial on how to do this on our website, so I'm just going through this very quickly right now. The service will then match your terms with names in ULAN and give you potential matches, seen here in blue. There is a hover over function, which brings up the ULAN record online in question, so you can make sure that your preferred match is indeed correct. Once you've matched all your names, you can write a simple script in Grell to then grab the corresponding ULAN IDs, which you can turn into URIs or use in whatever manner you'd like in your system. What we've now allowed is for a user to grab other fielded data from our vocabularies in a much easier fashion. So this goes beyond a simple match of a name or term and grabbing IDs. You can now grab all manner of additional fields from the record itself, and this is based on requests from our users. So let's say, as I'm showing here, let's say you have a column of reconciled artist names, which you can see in the blue on the left, and you have a corresponding ULAN IDs for those matches, but you think to yourself, I would like more ULAN data than just this. You go to that column of reconciled names, then edit column, then add columns from reconciled values. This brings up a box where you can choose additional columns from ULAN and add them to your data. Biographies, descriptive notes, nationality and culture, roles, variant terms. Here I've clicked on biographies, and you can see the corresponding ULAN biographies pop up in an additional column on the right. Here's another example where we've chosen variant terms, which again appear in an additional column on the right there. Conceivably, you can add as much data as you like. There are museums in the US that add a lot of this data directly from ULAN in their online collections, so this makes things much easier for them. It also gives them an avenue to contribute data that isn't in ULAN as well. A couple other things that I don't need to really display or show. I mentioned this last time, the Alma Refine application that the Ex Libris company added is worth mentioning, even though we have no relationship with them other than that they created a cloud app that uses the OpenRefine reconciliation service to grab IDs from the Getty vocabularies and populate MARC records with them. This is something that came up in the field and was requested, and they created an app for it. Secondly, really quickly, our web form, which is used by people wishing to contribute one-off or smaller numbers of individual vocab records to us. That is now available with all browsers. Before, believe it or not, it was only available with Internet Explorer, but that was finally changed and it is available to everyone now. There are a couple of additional topics I wanted to discuss today that broadly relate to our community of documentation and metadata professionals and kind of act as an open-ended discussion that we could address in the future too. In 2021, we asked an outside consultant for an independent review of the Getty vocabularies. This was solely a review of the content of the vocabularies and how well we were fulfilling our goals and the greater GRI goals of becoming more multilingual and inclusive, bearing in mind that we have several different user groups, including catalogers and indexers, scholars, casual users who need only top-tier data, and also developers. Without getting into granular detail, this report cemented a group of primary suggestions for our team. First, to create an overall vision statement that expresses the need for encyclopedism in our vocabularies that is pluralist, socially just, and decolonized. Second, there should be continued proactivity in finding new areas and terminologies that are underrepresented in the vocabularies. Third, we need to mine existing data sets to add some of that data. Fourth, we must commit to outreach to professionals that work with underrepresented communities and create partners for data exchange. This is just one aspect in which we're looking at the future of vocabularies. Another issue is dealing with unbiased and inclusive terminology, or in contrast, problematic terminology, and examining that issue in relation to not just our vocabularies, but vocabularies as a whole. What are the primary issues, and how are we in the program dealing with it? Patricia Harpring, the managing editor of the Getty Vocabulary Program, delivered a significant presentation on this issue recently, and it garnered a lot of interest in the community, as few, if any, were really dealing with it at this level. I will summarize a few things here, but at the end I will post the link to her presentation, which you can look at and download if this interests you, as it's much more detailed. The primary goals here would be to provide the structure and practice that facilitates different points of view within the data, to help facilitate the use of unbiased terminology, to help facilitate the inclusion of terms that help to express ambiguity or uncertainty, and also the points of views of various cultures, and how to do that within data structure itself, and also in the content, to acknowledge cultural traditions, to have sensitivity regarding preferred terms, in quotes, with regard to ethnicity, gender identity, and cultural preferences, to have sensitivity toward biased historical points of view, to respect personal privacy, yet also maintain the critical ability to research, and to continue to ensure accessibility and inclusivity for the user community. Where do we stand currently? In fact, we've been working on these areas for years, both in terms of data structure and with data content, yet there's still a long way to go. We do have a general mandate for the Getty Vocabulary Program to be ever more multilingual, inclusive, and flexible in terms of accessibility and data structure. We do not prescribe how to use terms and instead assist in decision making. Yet users may use the terms in the vocabularies how they wish. We have the ability to add contextual information, which is very important. We include historic and obsolete terms, which are flagged as such in the data. We acknowledge that we are not in the position to make weighty decisions and in fact allow and encourage expert communities as contributors to actuate the change in content. Still, we're a staff of 4 people and sometimes a graduate intern, so we do in fact rely quite a bit on contributors' data. Patricia's presentation on this subject goes into much greater detail, but let me show a few specific examples detailing how these issues play out in our vocabularies. In the AAT, the variant term denoi was used in scholarship, but since then it has been used for a related but different vessel. So we can use an avoid use flag in this instance to illuminate this issue, yet still allow for historical viewpoints. Also in the AAT, the term undocumented immigrants contains a variant term that is roundly considered negative in context. While we would want to continue to keep that term as a variant for use in retrieval and indexing, we can add the cautionary pejorative flag in this instance to express that in scholarship and sources, that term is not only not preferred, but has negative connotations. In Maori culture, rocks and stone are classified differently. They are classified by appearance rather than geological origin. So, in the AAT, we can create separate entries and hierarchies for these terms, keeping cultural difference alive in the hierarchies themselves, while still containing a separate hierarchical link to the same rock in the hierarchy based on geological origin. When it comes to terms for cultures and nationalities, there are many sensitive and outmoded terminologies. The avoid use flag is also useful in this instance, where we can indicate a term that the ancestral Puebloan people do not prefer, but was prevalent in scholarship for many years. When it comes to hierarchies of styles, periods, and cultures by region, we have to ask if we are actually reflecting the indigenous people's point of view. Sometimes this is much more complex than a simple hierarchy and involves different kinds of relationships over time. Can museums and experts combine forces to address this complicated issue? This is another example of a Nahua term from the Florentine Codex project. Because the term has no English equivalent, we flag the preferred term in Nahua as a loan term with preferred use in English and Spanish, and then we can flag another as a, quote, literal translation. In TGN, place names very often change, and those changes are often related to sensitivity to indigenous communities. Here we have an English language preferred place name and an Australian Aboriginal language preferred place name. But which should be the record's preferred term? This is another issue that needs scrutiny. And in ULAN, artists who are from the recently named North Macedonia should be examined, because those artists are technically not North Macedonian. They prefer to be referred to as simply Macedonian, although that designation must be disambiguated from Greek Macedonian. In TGN, we can also examine hierarchies with respect to indigenous cultures. Here, a separate hierarchy has been created for places that are both in a U.S. state, yet they are also part of a tribal nation. We can have these terms in multiple places to reflect these different conceptions of place. Another important question regarding artist information in vocabularies: when is it appropriate to include information about recent or living people, such as with their gender identity? It's an open issue. Would it be when it is established in reliable published sources that these artists so self-identify as such? Privacy is paramount, but to eliminate knowledge is to deny research. An artist's oeuvre may be influenced by or publicly focused on their own gender identity or sexual preference. If we include this data, are the sources reliable? It's important to strike a balance. The primary goal of vocabulary data is for disambiguation, not contextual biographical information. With respect to these issues, where do we go? We have to reimagine these goals. We must nurture new relationships and contributions and come up with new ideas about how to serve our users. We need to prioritize co-referencing between our vocabulary records and other published data sets and continue to have our data free and open. For more on this topic, you can visit our training materials webpage at this address, where you'll find the most recent presentations, including Patricia's that I just mentioned. Please become part of this conversation. The museum documentation community is very important to us. And that's all for me today. I'm really sorry I cannot be with you in person. I miss all my friends and colleagues. Onward to Gregg Garcia, who helped build the Getty Vocabularies, and his work with our linked open data. Thanks again.
So, yeah, you're free to applause. And though Jonathan is not here today, many thanks to him for this presentation. And for those of you who joined a bit later, as Jonathan is not here, we can't have any Q&A today, but in case you have any questions or comments, you are free to post them in workshop, and later we can ask Jonathan to look at them then. And now, next on the stage will be Gregg Garcia, also from Getty, software architect, and he will talk a bit more about the news of their linked open data site. And yes, so the Gregg Garcia.
Hello, my name is Gregg Garcia. I'm a software architect with Getty Digital, and I'm going to present to you the Getty Vocabularies technical update, along with some information on upcoming changes to the linked data implementation at vocab.getty.edu. So the current list of Getty Vocabularies publications and services. First of all, we have the full XML and tab delimited relational tables downloads, and the vocabulary website, which is a human readable search hierarchy and full record display of the vocabulary data, and then also the XML web services. All three of those products have the original vocabulary modeling, the traditional vocabulary data structure. Reconciliation service for OpenRefine is accessible using the OpenRefine tool or through HTTP requests directly to the service endpoint. And then we also have the linked data site with downloads and Sparkle endpoints at vocab.getty.edu, currently modeled using the SCOS and schema.org ontologies. And then we have the linked data site with the activity stream and Sparkle endpoint. That's the Vocabularies data modeled using the linked art specification. So what I wanted to talk about is changes to vocab.getty.edu. What's going to happen is that it will be the same Vocabularies data, just different models or different profiles depending on what you request. So if you want the linked art modeling of the Vocabularies data, you can get by default, or the linked data site will be serving by default JSON and JSON LD serializations of the linked art model. So as you can see here, you can get that either by just putting the .json extension at the end of the URIs, or you can include the accept header in your HTTP requests for application JSON or application LD plus JSON. These are only for top-level entity URIs, so URIs like AAT slash then the AAT ID, or ULAN slash the ULAN ID, or TGN slash the TGN ID. So for backwards compatibility purposes, in the JSON and JSON LG serializations, what you will need to do is submit a header, the accept profile header, with this particular value for the SCOS ontology URI in order to get the old SCOS schema.org JSON and JSON LD serializations. That is at, once again, the top level entity URIs. So AT and the AT ID, ULAN, ULAN ID, and TGN, and the TGN ID. So what will not be changing at vocab.getty.edu is that the modeling for the turtle, N-triples, and RDF XML serializations will still serve the SCOS and schema.org version. In addition, all subaddresses on vocab.edu, and here we have some examples with AAT/term or AAT/source, so anything except those top level URIs will still be in the SCOS and schema.org model for all serializations. In addition, the Sparkle endpoint will also still be that SCOS schema.org modeling. Whenever you query the Sparkle endpoint, it will return that model for all cases. So when is this going to happen? This is going to be implemented sometime this summer, when we feel comfortable that everybody has been informed and people can switch over any integrations that they have. So please stay tuned to vocab.getty.edu itself, and also any updates or announcements at the Google group, the Getty Vocab LOD Google group. So now I'm going to do a demo in order to show you how to access these different modeling options. So to demonstrate how these new changes are going to work, we're going to use our API client here, or REST client, in order to send requests to the current endpoint. So you can see vocab.getty.edu, and then whenever you put the .json extension on it, then accept header of application-json, do the request, and it brings back a JSON document with this structure, having the subject, predicate, object arrangement, and then going down you see the different triples associated with that and values associated with the SCOS modeling. So that's currently what's in at vocab.getty.edu. Whenever we go to the new configuration, then what will happen, you have different options. So you have essentially the root of the URI, and this goes the same for with the .json extension. If you say accept application JSON, if you have that as your header, then it will return the linked art version of the vocabularies data. So this is the AT record for WRITA, it's our usual test record. And you can see the linked art modeling. If you provide this accept profile header with the URI for the SCOS ontology, then the website will give you back the same JSON structure that it provided before using the SCOS and schema.org modeling. In the same way, if you use the .json extension, it'll provide the same. So the same thing goes there if you do not provide the accept profile with the SCOS value. It will bring you back the linked art model JSON serialization. And always, thank you, CIDOC.